we're back and we're moving into our first conversation for this morning, where we're focusing on the Caribbean region and a new publication that has come out from the Caribbean Court of Justice Academy of Law. And the book is called Pioneering Caribbean Women Jurists. We're joined at this time by Judge and Chair of the CCJ Academy for Law and the co-editor of the publication, the Honorable Mr. Justice Winston Anderson. Good morning.
Good morning, Malini. Good morning, Paul. It's good to be with you. Good morning.
All right. Lovely to have you as well. We know you have a very busy schedule, but this is such an important milestone that has been documented, and we'd love to hear more about the stories that have been compiled. But before we do, let's step back and talk about the CCJ Academy of Law and the objectives that they have.
Yes, well, the CCJ Academy for Law is the educational arm of the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes.
And by this we mean that while the court has the responsibility for developing the law through the judicial process, through making decisions, making orders, and so on, the Academy has responsibility for developing the law through non-judicial means, that is to say, educational outreach activities. So we have conferences, we have seminars, workshops, we have all kinds of engagements in which we try to get members of the legal profession together to consider important areas of the law, consider improvements in the law, and consider how we can best work together to make living in the Caribbean, a better experience. So that is really the function of the Academy, and I'm very, very happy to lead it.
I think that's so important. How often do you guys hold these meetings, these seminars, and these think groups?
As often as possible. Yes, we do have a regular biannual conference. So every 2 years there is a major conference, and this is held throughout the region, different countries. We have not yet been to Belize, but we hope, of course, in due course, to be in Belize. We also have short conferences, webinars, especially now, of course, during the pandemic, when we can't meet as we would like, as freely as we would like physically. We have a number of webinars that we put on. So you mentioned the busyness of my schedule. Yesterday, I was heavily involved with a webinar on WIPO, intellectual property rights in the region, geographical indications and trademarks and so on. We collaborate with the World Health Organization in relation to the pandemic and how we can make sure that our citizens are protected as best we can from the scourge of non-communicable diseases. So there's just a whole range of international organizations, regional organizations that we collaborate with a view to making sure that the law protects us as best it can.
Yeah, so the project, we see that the main focus of the project, Pioneering Caribbean Women Jurists, is focused on women. Why focus on women for this year's project?
Yes, well, I'm sure you'd agree, Paul, and I'm pretty sure that Melanie would agree as well, that women play a very important role in our society. And that role is very largely unsung, unrecognized, so that women have been the backbone of our Caribbean societies for a very, very long time. Many times, the women provide not just, material support, but they are also very often people of faith. And they have held our families together through thick and thin, through trials and tribulations, so to speak. Now, we are not competent to go into all of those areas, but what we are competent to do at the Academy is to look at the contribution that women have made to the legal infrastructure of our region. And we thought it was therefore fitting that on this occasion, we would look at the tremendous contribution that women have made to various aspects of our legal arrangements. So we look, for example, at the contributions that they have made as head of state, as head of government, as judges, as teachers, legal activists, as diplomats. And we were just amazed to realize that the contribution is really nothing short of spectacular.
Yeah. So 34 women were identified, but let's put this into perspective. As a Caribbean brothers and sisters, we know that the evolving role of women in our culture has been one that many have witnessed within their lifetime. Even within the court systems, there have been changes to be able to ensure equality within the courts, from not telling women what to wear. And these are very critical areas of development that shows progress. Tell me about it from your point of view, with your experience in the legal system.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I think the evolution of women's rights and rights of other minorities as well, where women are not really a minority, but the right of minorities has been something that has been very, very clear and strong over the years. In relation to the law and the legal profession, women were for a long time excluded. I think it was in 1919 or thereabouts that women were allowed even to become lawyers. So the very first lawyer in the Caribbean, a woman in Guyana, became a lawyer in 1929, I think it was. So but before that, it was completely dominated by men, and women couldn't get into the profession. Since then, there has been a very steep elevation of the presence and the visibility and the status of women in the legal profession. So now, if you look around our jurisdictions, you'll be pleased to hear that in many cases, the women are in fact leading in many aspects of our legal life. So that in the judiciary, for example, the case of Guyana once more, the women who head the judiciary, both as Chief Justice and as Chancellor, are in fact very strong women in their own rights. And before them, we had Desiree Bernard, who is a very well-known regional figure, who also led the judiciary in Guyana and was the very first woman judge on the Caribbean Court of Justice. But we have women who have led and are leading in almost every jurisdiction that you can mention in the region, and of course in Belize, the Chief Justice, of course, is Judge Arana. So we have women now in every conceivable position in the legal system, and I think we're all the better for it.
Yeah. I'm so glad, we were waiting for the mention of Belize, or Chief Magistrate, Chief Justice, and or Attorney General, all women at this time.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And the the Attorney General, I must say, appeared, many times before the Caribbean Court of Justice, and we are all, as judges, very impressed, of course, with her and with her submissions. She was heavily involved in a seminal case that we did, the Maya Alliance case. And of course, we were all very pleased that she was appointed as the Attorney General.
Yes. And when you look at the impact of, I think you've mentioned before, just in having the inclusion of minorities. When you look at the justice system, it's even more important that you have representation. Can you address that from that perspective, having the representation of women within the judiciary, especially at the highest level?
Yes, but it's obviously very, very important. And we have undertaken in many international agreements to honor the rights, recognize and honor the rights of minorities. I think, the critical point is that in these relatively small societies, we have no margin for error. We don't have the luxury of, having some of our best players on the sidelines, so to speak. It's really all hands on deck. And I don't think it is sensible to omit any kind of segment of our society that can contribute in a meaningful way to societal development. And certainly women and other minorities can and do make a tremendous contribution. Yes, I was going to say, of course, that we did mention one of the very outstanding women in Belize in the form and the person of the Chief Justice and also of the Attorney General. Neither of them, unfortunately, perhaps, features in the book, but there is another Belizean who does feature in the book, and I don't know whether he wishes to go in that direction or
Yes,
instead.
Yeah,
please.
sure. Let's do it.
Yes, well, we are very, very honored to have been able to include Her Excellency, the Ambassador Lois Young, in the book as a pioneering Caribbean woman jurist. I believe she's very well known
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
in Belize, of course, being the representative and ambassador of Belize to the United Nations. But the book is a compilation of the biographies of all 34 women that we have honored. And her biography, Her Excellency's biography, was written by her brother, I think her younger brother, Harold, Dr. Harold Young. And he wrote a beautiful essay about his big sister, shall we say, and tells the story of, of their early life in Belize City. I think they went with their father to Sierra Leone for a while when he was in broadcasting. Returned, she went to high school, of course, in Belize City. I think it was Wesley College and St. John's College. And then in the 1960s, late 1960s, she won the Belize Open Scholarship. She was the first woman to win this scholarship, the essay recalls. And she then was free to go to any university based on the scholarship in the world that she wished. She was thinking of teaching, but her father apparently suggested and insisted on the law. So she went to London University, studied law, and of course returned to Belize. She had a spectacular career in the law, practicing initially in the public sector, in the public bar, but then over 30 years in the private bar, made a remarkable contribution there. Entered politics for a little while, I gather, but did not suit her, and she did not suit the politics either, apparently. So she then went off, appointed, of course, the ambassador representative Belize to the United Nations, where she made an outstanding contribution. And we're very, very proud of her, and we're proud to claim her as one of our pioneering women jurists.
What is the hope that you have for readers when they read this book? What is it, the takeaway that you want them to have?
One word, Paul: inspiration. We want them to be inspired. And I was observing the opening of your show, and I really enjoyed it. In this day and age in which we live, we are surrounded by so many challenges, negative forces, and so on. We need positive influences, I think, in our lives. And we are hopeful, and by we mean all of the persons who collaborated on this project. And I include here particularly my co-editor, Madam Justice Maureen Rajnath Lee of the CCJ, and of course the President, of course, of the court, Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders. We're really hoping that this book will be read by a wide audience, young girls, of course, but also young men, and that they will see the stories of these women and the challenges that they faced, and the fact that they overcame these challenges to make a lasting contribution, so that they themselves could also be similarly motivated, similarly challenged to make their own indelible contribution to the Caribbean.
Now, let's talk a bit about making the selection of the 34 women who are included in the book.
Not easy.
I can't imagine, yeah.
Because we Justice Rajnath Lee and I formed an advisory committee and also a selection committee. The selection committee consisted of 12 persons, eminent persons from around the region, drawn from various disciplines. Law, of course, but also history, politics, gender, economics, and so on. And we elicited nominations from around the region. So that we had, I think, 83, certainly over 80 nominations. And the job of the selection committee was to whittle down the over 80 nominations to a number, a relatively small number. We were thinking of about 12 or 15. So we began that process, made over several months last year. But when we got to 34, Melanie, we could not go any further because it was so difficult, first of all, to get to 34. We had to leave out so many others. Virtually 50 had to be left out. But when we got to that number, we couldn't go any lower because the significance and the strength of the contributions were such that we could not leave out anybody else. And I have to say that in the 50 or so that we left off, we could identify giants in our development. And it seems to me that we really will have to find an opportunity to honor the contribution of these other women who unfortunately did not make the final cut.
Yeah. And, you know, it's talking about pioneering, and it's within the legal system. You're talking about policies, you're talking about movers and shakers in this region. Let's talk about some of the stories that you can recall and share with us.
Yes, well, they are very, very varied, you know. And as I said, we have stories about persons who have made it to the pinnacle of our legal system. So we have a head of state, for example, in the person of Her Excellency Paula May Weeks of Trinidad and Tobago. She's a sitting head of state. And of course, she came from a background steeped primarily in the judiciary. She was a judge, also a justice of appeal. And she went from there on to the presidency. We have also another head of state in the person of Dame Sandra Mason of Barbados, who is now the Governor General of Barbados, but who is soon to be the President of the Republic of Barbados. That decision having been taken to move Barbados into the Republican status. We have heads of government. Mia Motley comes to mind. Mia Motley, of course, the extraordinary and dynamic leader of the government of Barbados. We honor people who have passed as well. So we honor Eugenia Charles, who may be familiar again to some members of your audience. Eugenia Charles served for 15 years as the Prime Minister of Dominica. We have honorees in the area of persons who occupied high national office. Persons like Billy Miller out of Barbados. Judges, I've mentioned a few already. There's Ree Bernard of Guyana, Zayla McCullough of Jamaica, Dame Janice Pereira of the OECS. We have persons that we honor in relation to their contribution to international organizations. And that is where, of course, Her Excellency Lois Young was honored. We also have Ambassador Manorma Suknandan from Suriname, teachers of the law, people like Norma Ford out of Barbados, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine out of Trinidad and Tobago, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's a very varied collection of women, and I think
and varying
that reading the book
contributions
absolutely would be rewarding. Yes.
So let me ask you, very often we see people where they are today, and we don't always get the privilege of learning their story or the journey that it took to get there. And so as you put together these biographies and you're doing the editing of, I mean, you looked at over 80, but you finalized the book with 34. Is
Yes.
there a commonality that you identified in these women?
That's a great question. And it is difficult because the women are as varied as you could imagine. You know, some came from privileged backgrounds, but many came from very, very humble backgrounds. Some had to struggle tremendously. So Their life stories are very, very varied. I think that the common thread that runs throughout the book is a determination that they all had to make the best they could of the talents that God had given them. And they did this with a singularity of purpose. So they may not have conceptualized it, not all of them, in this way, but I do believe that the common thread was a desire, an attempt, a resolution to make a contribution to their society. They may have thought of it in different ways, but I do think that that is the common theme running throughout. That we have to make do with the resources that we have and make the best contribution that we can to our families, to our community, and to our society.
And would you say from the biographies that you in the book that these women were determined to be pioneers or simply became pioneers because of their determination?
Another great question. No, I don't think, well, in some cases, there may have been the thought that, look, I am the first or among the first to be doing this. But I think in the vast majority of the cases, it wasn't really a thought articulated in that way. I think, as I said, it was simply a matter of, I have to be the best that I can be. I have to make the greatest use of the talents that I have. And sometimes, of course, the push, if you will, sometimes came from behind. To some extent, I think some of the push for Her Excellency here in Belize came from her family, her father in particular, who sort of championed the cause of the law. But in every case, I think the driving force wasn't so much to be identified as a pioneer. That came as a byproduct of what they did. I think that the driving push was to excel to the greatest extent that they could.
Okay. Now, as we look at the contributions of women, how do you see their involvement progressing in these leadership positions over the next decade or so?
Well, Paul, if we're not very careful, you and I will not have any positions of leadership over the next 50 years or so. But seriously, I think already women are occupying every conceivable position that you can think of. And I think that will continue to be the case. If you look at the output of the universities that we have in the region, you will see that women are the dominant graduates in almost every faculty. So in the faculty of law, we're talking about upwards of 70% of the graduates being women. Now, the force of those numbers may take a while to percolate up to the top positions. But already I've pointed out that women are occupying virtually all of the top positions, or they have occupied virtually all of the top positions in several of our key areas of national life: judiciary, head of state, head of government, and so on. So that I think that at some point, and I'm not sure whether Melanie agrees with us, but at some point perhaps the attention might have to, turn in another direction. And we may have to begin to have a serious conversation about where our men, particularly our young men, are falling down. And if you go to the prisons, as I do, occasionally, just to check on what's happening there, again, the population is predominantly one way. And I think at some point we're really going to have to think about how we sort of bring our young men particularly, back from the kinds of activities that many of them are engaged in. But certainly I think women are on the right trajectory. There may be some areas which are still in need of attention to make sure that there's complete equality for women. But I think generally speaking, our women in the region are on the right path to equality, really, with the other members of our society.
Well, Honorable Justice, we will invite you back to have that conversation deeper about young men in this era, because that is really interesting. I'd love to hear it from a regional perspective. But, you know, as you say, women are starting to essentially take their place. It is because we do have pioneers who do so. You mentioned earlier that the book is going to be published. You know, when you look at the idea of people we call heroes, we usually look outside of our country and we look outside of our region. Is that the hope with projects like this, that we will start to see within our own selves the potential that we have and the change that we are creating?
Absolutely. And I will say, first of all, that the book is published now. I think initially when the CCJ Academy got in touch with you, it was not yet published, but it's now published and it is available. We are hoping to make it available in public libraries, you know, throughout the region. And also the book can be acquired from the CCJ Academy for Law. I should also mention that the book is going to be accompanied by a series of videos which will look at the life story of these women through their own eyes, in their own words. And of course, you'll be able to hear from the ambassador from Belize about her own story, her own life experience. But to return to your point about heroes, I agree again with you. I think very often we tend to look outside for our heroes, and you know, that has a stultifying effect, in my view, on our psychological development, as I think you're hinting. And it is very, very important, therefore, that we identify our heroes and try to emulate the examples that they have set for us. So that was clearly one of the objectives that we had in this project. And I do think it was executed so very well. And I have to pay tribute to the many persons who collaborated so freely in the writing of the biographies. I mentioned Dr. Harold Young, yes. Of course, from Belize. But in every case, we had to find somebody who would be responsible for writing the biography. And very often we found a relative, a sibling. Sometimes we found a niece. You know, a husband wrote about his wife. Dr. Kenny Anthony, Prime Minister of St. Lucia, former Prime Minister, wrote about Professor Antoine. So it was a very interesting dynamic, you know, because, of course, being the husband, you have to be careful.
I was going to say, that was, this could have been the initiation of some family wars or some real
Absolutely.
bargaining. Don't talk about this tricky. And I won't say that.
Very tricky assignment.
Yes.
But it brought a new dynamic, obviously, to bear. And sometimes you could feel the respect and the awe. It was a catharsis in many ways, because it's not very often that a close family member has the opportunity to express the appreciation and the love and the respect and admiration that they felt. So we are very, very grateful to all of the contributors for really making this, to my mind, a very outstanding publication.
That's a wonderful idea, though, because our family sees us through different eyes.
Absolutely.
and you're not a judge in the CCJ in your home. Your daddy, your brother, your uncle, and that has no weight, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
So that's fascinating. And as you said, the book can be published. Is it accessible for all readers? Is it, you know, something that we can get high schoolers to be able to enjoy as well?
Another great question. Yes, absolutely. That was one of the intentions, and we made it very clear to the biographers that they had to write for the widest and the youngest possible audience, because we wanted to make it accessible. It's not a legal treatise that you have to have a law degree to read. The intention was to make it a staple in our high schools, for example, so that the younger generation coming up could see what had gone on before. And I really do think, by and large, it has achieved that objective. There are one or two essays which are written as sort of, academic format with some footnotes. But I would say that generally speaking, they are very, very accessible. And I think your readers, your viewers will enjoy reading the book.
Perfect.
Well, we thank you for coming on the show this morning, taking the time out to tell us all about it. How would you sum up the experience of co-editing it?
It was a wonderfully exhilarating experience. And when Justice Raj Notley and I started out, we never dreamt that we'd get into such rewarding and pleasurable work, because we learned so much about all of the honorees. And I think we were particularly inspired by those who had to struggle against great odds to get to where they eventually ended up. So we found ourselves in awe to some extent, and very, very proud of our fellow Caribbean citizens who happen to be pioneering Caribbean women jurists.
Lovely way to close. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, and so that does it for that segment. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we have with us Eco Wraps. We'll hear about a Belize business that is offering eco-friendly and sustainable alternatives to plastic wraps. So you don't want to miss that. Stay tuned.